Hi, in this video I want to talk about the first and most important element that makes up our stages of organizations and stages of the self. And in fact, it's so important we even put it in the name. It's the stages of evolution or stages of development. But before we get into any models and what we use, what others use, what is out there, I want to talk about evolution and development itself, because evolution is omnipresent. It's always been there and it's always gonna be there. There's no place you can look where no evolution is taking place, because everything is in a constant state of development. Let me make an example of what we mean when we talk about evolution. So at some point, atoms made up molecules and made up cells. So this was a kind of a stage development of evolution. Now, of course, this is really simplistic and I left out an entire number of steps that were between those stages, but let's make it easy on us. So atoms at some point were a fixed and finished entity, but then more than one atom got together and made up a molecule. And the molecule was on the next higher stage of complexity, of development. So it included and integrated atoms, so it was made up of atoms, but it was more, and still is of course, more than atoms, because there are more possibilities and more complex laws that guide molecules than that guide atoms. And the same of course is true for the cells in relation to the molecules. I'm gonna make another example to make this a little more tangible. So let's say you start learning a new language. You're gonna start with the alphabet first, and you're gonna move on to words and then to sentences. So this is the order of complexity that makes up a language. Now, the sentences include the words and the letters, so they're made up of these two elements, but they're more than that. So a bunch of letters just sitting on top of each other has no meaning. It's not more than just a bunch of letters. If you put them in the right order though, you get meaning, and the meaning of the word is on the next higher stage of complexity than the letters, because the meaning might even change the meaning of the letters. So this tells us that the words and the sentences are on the next higher stage of complexity from the letters. The same of course is true for cells in relation to molecules, because they make up an entire new world of possibilities. Even though they're made up just by molecules, and they just contain a whole lot of molecules, they are more than them. They're emergent. They bring new laws and possibilities into this world. And now we get to the interesting part, because these same principles guide the evolution of our consciousness. Evolutionary psychologists have been agreeing for quite some time that we don't just stop developing when our childhood is over, but that we actually develop through our whole lives, and that this evolution is never over, and that the highest stage hasn't been found yet. You can imagine this evolution of consciousness by climbing a ladder. When you climb a ladder, with each step you see a little wider and further, you see more of the world. You can still see what you've been seeing all along, but your perspective is changing because you have more context. So the perspective that you had before is gone. You're not going to be able to see the world as you have been seeing it before. But you still see that part of the world, and you remember how you were looking at the world before. And this is exactly what happens when you develop when your consciousness develops. So for example, when someone asks you what the meaning of life is, your answer is going to be a lot different now than it was 10 years ago. And so this is because you see more of the world and of life and of meaning itself. But you still might remember what you were saying 10 years ago, and you can still empathize with this perspective that you had. And this actually makes the term stages a little bit misleading, because it implies that you are on a certain stage, leaving all the previous ones behind you, and that they are no longer relevant to you. But the newer stage always includes all of the previous stages, just like the concentric circles in our model show. The higher stage includes the lower stage, and all of those laws of the lower stages still apply. This is true for consciousness development, and it's also true for every development that has ever been happening. So atoms that are part of molecules, that are part of cells, that are part of organisms function in the exact same way. The old laws and old possibilities are still there and still apply, but the old part is now part of a newer, bigger whole that has new possibilities and that brings new laws into this world. Now, this development of consciousness has been researched around the globe by many scientists with lots and lots of studies, But each scientist has always looked at part of the consciousness because they have been measuring a part of development. So there are loads of examples for these researchers. So there is, for example, Kohlberg and Gilligan, who have been looking at morality. There is Piaget and Aubin, who have been looking at cognition. Fowler, the stages of belief. Jean Gebser with worldviews. Dunbeck with values, etc., etc. There are many different studies that have been made for this, and this makes this map of consciousness extremely complex because each one looks at part of development. To make matters even more complicated, some use, for example, 3 stages, others use 15 or more, and so how do we get order into this chaos? Now, we have Ken Wilber to thank for that because his system, Aqua, did exactly that. So he looked at all of these studies and he put them next to each other so that they made sense, so that the stages actually are in line. Now his system is called Aqua, which means all quadrants, all lines, and all levels. And levels are the same as stages. Our model is mostly based on Aqua and on Ken Wilber's work. For example, the colors are the ones that he used. And why do we use colors? Very simple. If you call someone a level 3 person, that's going to be a very difficult situation for you. If you say, well, you're green, that's not going to be as hard to swallow because green is very value free. So what are the rules for this development? Well, first of all, you can never skip a stage. All of the stages you have to go through up to a certain point. Rule number 2, there is only one direction. And that's to more complexity. You can't develop back, you can regress, but that's only for a certain time. Rule number 3, these stages are universal and interculturally the same. So they might look very different when you go to different places or different times in history, but the core structures of a stage is always the same. Rule number 4, this development never runs smoothly. So it might look very straight and smooth on a model like this, but actually in reality you can have a peak experience, so you jump up to a higher stage and you fall back again, then you can regress up down to a lower stage and come back up. And also you're not really just on one stage, you spread out to multiple stages, and you will hear more about that in the video about the lines of development. But just imagine that you have like a center of gravity that's on one particular stage, and that's where you feel at home. Now, one more thing I want to mention. Just like we as individuals develop through these stages in the span of our lifetime, humanity has gone through them in the history of humanity and is still going through them. So these stages have emerged or manifested through the millennia and are now part of our experience. Just like all of the species of animals you see out there have developed through the lifetime of the planet, the stages have emerged in the lifetime of humanity. So when you go back in history and you look at a certain period, you will find that people there have been on another stage of consciousness. And it's really interesting to look at history through that lens, to see how humanity has evolved and how certain aspects of our experience just haven't been part of reality back in the day. Okay, I hope by now you have an idea of what development of consciousness means, and I'll see you in the next video when we talk about the developmental lines.